Hello, everyone, and welcome to the IPSASB's Advancing Public Sector Sustainability Reporting webinar. My name is Dave Warren. I'm the IPSASB Deputy Director, and this is a project that's very close to my heart. I've spent the first half of this year really working on this document and holding the pen while the board gave some really good direction in developing this document. So from my perspective, it's very important to raise awareness on the IPSASB's potential direction on this project and sustainability reporting in general. And it's also really important that we reach out to our stakeholders and receive any feedback that's available and to help the IPSASB make decisions as they move into December and make a big decision as it relates to sustainability. Throughout this webinar, we will have a number of polling sections where we'll open it up and ask you, the participants, your views. We will take those views away and include them in the IPSASB's analysis on how to proceed with sustainability reporting. That analysis will be performed in Q4 of 2022. And like I said, the IPSASB will be making a final decision on where to move with sustainability reporting at its December 2022 meeting. Before I dive into the actual sustainability consultation paper, I wanted to give a little background on the IPSASB. So I put this one slide together, and I know for some of you it'll be a reminder, but for others it may be a quick introduction. So starting at the very top, the IPSASB is the global standard setter for the public sector as it relates to financial reporting. And what the IPSASB really sets out to do is develop accounting guidance for public sector entities so that their users have good information to hold those decision makers to account. The IPSASB also believes it's very important to promote the use of accrual accounting, whether it's IPSAS or another accounting framework, to enhance public financial management. The IPSASB is made up of 18 board members from around the world. There's lots of representation from each of the regions around the world. The IPSASB also has achieved gender balance, which it's very proud of. And the 18 members also represent various functions around the world as well. So we have auditors on our board, we have practitioners, we have academics, really from all swaths of life. So the IPSASB is well represented by its 18 members. The IPSAS, the International Public Sector Accounting Standards, are developed in a very inclusive way. And what I mean by that is throughout the process, each step of the process is open. All the IPSASB meetings are open to the public. They're streamed on YouTube. And each phase of the development of a standard, whether it's the consultation phase, exposure phase, or final stage, constituents and stakeholders are given the opportunity to provide their views and help shape the standard while the IPSASB develops it. The financial reporting activities of the IPSASB, and that's key financial reporting, I'll come back to that later in our webinar, they're funded by the International Federation of Accountants, the Asian Development Bank, and a few sovereign governments from around the world. The IPSASB about 10 years ago established a robust oversight process led by the Public Interest Committee. The Public Interest Committee really just makes sure that the IPSASB's due process is being followed for each of its projects. Representatives from the World Bank, the IMF, the OECD, and the INTOSAI make up the membership of the Public Interest Committee. Diving into the Advancing Public Sector Sustainability Reporting consultation paper, if you're on this webinar and you've been following sustainability, I hope you'd agree with me that this has been a rapidly evolving space. It feels like every day I have new emails in my inbox telling me what's changed and how it's moving more quickly. From the IPSASB's perspective, they really started discussing this about 18 months ago, so in early 2021. And this was discussed in the context of its mid-period work program consultation. And this is where the IPSASB last year went out and asked its constituents what it should add to its work program because it had some additional resources moving into future years. And as part of these discussions, the IPSASB discussed whether sustainability reporting should be proposed as one of those projects. And ultimately, the IPSASB decided that it wasn't appropriate to propose sustainability reporting as a project because they felt it was bigger than just one project. It really was a shift in strategy And with the IPSASB strategy coming up in 2024 for a new 5-year strategy, they felt that was the appropriate place to consider sustainability reporting. That being said, in November of last year, the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, was established by the IFRS Foundation, and that showed the IPSASB some direction on where the private sector was going. About a month later in December, responses to the mid-period work program consultation came back, and more than half of our respondents, even though the IPSASB said we'd consider sustainability reporting later, told us that this was a missed opportunity and it should be considered now. Next, a few months later after that, and I believe it was around January 30th, the World Bank issued a report, and this report indicated that the IPSASB was an ideal organization to lead a consultation process on public sector sustainability. And that takes us to May 9th, where 3 months later, the IPSASB was able to develop its consultation paper and really focus on its role in this process. And what's important about this consultation paper is it's really putting forward 3 key recommendations. The first is that the IPSASB should lead this process. The second is, if the IPSASB does lead this process, it will focus first on climate related disclosures and the general disclosure requirements. And then finally, sustainability in general needs to be developed in haste. There's a significant demand right now, and the IPSASB, if it takes the lead on this, can't be lagging. In making this decision, whether it will take the lead on sustainability reporting or not, the IPSASB, like I said, will make this decision in December 2022 after responses to the consultation paper come in. But it will consider those responses. So is there public support? And in addition to that, I said that the current funding structure of the IPSASB focuses on its financial reporting. The IPSASB will also have to determine whether it has additional resources available to take on advancing public sector sustainability reporting. And I say that because the IPSASB is fully committed to its current financial reporting work program, and taking on sustainability reporting will add to that work program, and it needs additional resources. So in its consultation paper, the IPSASB first establishes that the public sector requires sustainability reporting. And it does this in 2 ways. The first box on this slide really focuses on the need for sustainability reporting in the public sector. And the second box at the bottom focuses on the need for a public sector specific framework in the public sector. And what they mean by that is just porting a private sector framework into the public sector will have some challenges. So starting with the top box, the focus here is, again, does the public sector need a sustainability reporting framework? And the 3 reasons that the IPSASB put forward are number 1, that there's a global public interest. And what it means by that is right now there's a surge of demand from individuals, citizens, entities around the world that decisions be made on a more sustainable basis. So goods and services are delivered in a more sustainable way. And while there's been, I'll say, quite a bit of movement on the private sector side, for these types of global initiatives, they can't really be done without the public sector. The public sector really leads on these types of massive initiatives. And the reason for that is the public sector sets policy. It's a taxation entity. It is able to regulate, it's able to subsidize. And each of those mechanisms allow the public sector to influence citizens and companies and entities to make different decisions, and in this case, more sustainable decisions. The second 2 points, the economic, environmental, social, and governance, and then capital markets. From this perspective, about 40% of the world's GDP is generated by the public sector. About 20% of the world's employees are employed by the public sector. And then about 40% of the global bond market is relates to the public sector. And the big takeaway here is that depending how the public sector wants to raise revenues, whether it's through taxation and whatever methods it wants to use there, and subsidies, or however it wants to drive sustainability there, or whether it wants to go to the debt market, And then on the other side of that, how the public sector wants to spend that money on what initiatives it wants to partake in, that will really drive sustainability globally. Touching on the last point, the capital markets, I said that 40% of the bond market is represented by the public sector. In this case, as the private sector moves to more sustainability reporting, in order not to be left behind, the public sector will have to maintain consistency in its offering documents. So another reason the public sector will have to likely move to a more sustainability reporting model. Moving to the second box, drivers for the public sector sustainability reporting guidance, and the view that the public sector needs a specific framework for itself really comes down to two factors. The first is a different focus in the public sector. In the private sector, there's generally a focus on the impact to the entity. So decisions that the entity makes, the environment around the entity, and what the impact is on the entity itself. So if I was to focus on climate, an individual entity might decide that it no longer wants to purchase its energy from coal power plants. It wants to move to energy developed by wind turbines, and that will have a cost on the entity. It'll have a carbon impact on the entity itself. But from a public sector perspective, their decisions can have a social impact as well. So you might have an energy regulator that makes that same decision, but it can also regulate the entire economy to move away from coal-powered energy and move to wind-powered energy. And as a result, that decision doesn't just have an impact on the individual entity, so the cost and the carbon footprint of the individual entity, but also society more broadly. And that societal impact will require different reporting and different principles when it comes to sustainability reporting. The second point, challenges in applying private sector guidance in the public sector. The IPSASB has identified a number of challenges in applying private sector guidance in the public sector. These are identified in its conceptual framework, and they range from the amount of non-exchange transactions, so grants where there's no consideration exchange. There's public sector assets that are generally held for service capacity rather than the income or the financial capacity they're able to generate. And then it kind of goes all the way down the gamut, and also it looks at things that just the long-term nature of the public sector. So factors like these often require, whether it's minor tweaks or significant shifts from private sector guidance when being applied in the public sector. So after talking about the drivers for public sector sustainability reporting, the first preliminary view that was put forward by the IPSASB is there's a need for global public sector specific sustainability guidance. And the question that I have for you is, do you agree that there's a need for this global public sector's sustainability reporting guidance? So hopefully on your screens now, you should see the polls up, and if you could please answer yes or no, we'll take those away and make sure the IPSASB sees those as part of their analysis. So I'm very happy to see that we have 100% support for a public sector framework being developed for the public sector, and that it should be specific to the public sector. That's consistent with what we've heard on a few other webinars that we've done, and what I've heard through back channels on what our constituents believe. So I'm glad that there's some consistency here as well. As we move into where I want to spend some time on the second preliminary view that was put forward, the IPSASB in its first preliminary view established that public sector sustainability reporting was necessary. Where the IPSASB moves to next is that the IPSASB is the right fit to lead the sustainability reporting. And it presents 5 reasons why it believes it's the case. The first is, while the IPSASB primarily focuses on financial reporting and developing financial statements, or general purpose financial statements, the IPSASB's mandate or its conceptual framework isn't limited to financial statements. It's actually more broad, and it applies to general purpose financial reports. And those financial reports, like I said, are broader than financial statements and include aspects such as sustainability reporting. And a good example of this, and this moves to the second bullet, is about 10 years ago, the IPSASB developed 3 recommended practice guidelines. And these are not mandatory sets of guidance, but they are designed to help entities provide additional disclosures and information to users that users might find useful around how the entity works. And 2 that I wanted to highlight are Recommended Practice Guideline 1 and Recommended Practice Guideline 3. So RPG 1 is reporting on long-term sustainability of an entity's finances, and RPG 3 is reporting service performance information. And in each case, again, like I said, these were developed 10 years ago. They are 100% applicable to sustainability reporting. And in fact, what the IPSASB is doing right now with a limited scope project, it is adding additional examples to these 2 RPGs to show how these sets of guidance can be applied to sustainability reporting. So no changes to the core text, but again, the IPSASB just wanted to highlight that these do apply to sustainability reporting. And it does have a framework right now that can be applied to show users and those evaluating the company the sustainability reporting initiatives or the sustainability initiatives that entities are undertaking. The next point, current projects. So I touched on the updates or the limited scope projects related to the recommended practice guidelines, but the IPSASB also has a natural resource project right now, and it issued a consultation paper on natural resources in conjunction with the sustainability reporting consultation paper. And the reason why the IPSASB saw these as linked is often what the IPSASB has observed is natural resources are observed or seen as a way to address sustainability initiatives. So if we focus on climate, if an entity wants to reduce its carbon footprint, it can maintain a forest or plant more trees. And again, these natural resources are a way to help with some sustainability initiatives. So there's a link there. Now, part of the natural resources project has scoped out any sustainability reporting, and it's really focusing on their recognition and measurement of natural resources. So the recognition and measurement of subsoil resources like oil. It also focuses on water and living resources. And like I said, specifically scopes out any sustainability aspect, but there is a link between the 2 projects and it could be expanded in the future. The 4th point is related to the IPSASB's 25 years of standard setting experience. So not only does the IPSASB know how to set standards, and as I mentioned on one of the first slides, it has a robust due process, but it also, through those 25 years, has developed relationships with the public sector and those that are leading sustainability initiatives within public sector entities. And as a result, the IPSASB has the resources to reach out to those individuals and really understand the public sector challenges that are facing those entities to develop guidance that will ultimately help users. And then the last point is the IPSASB can move with urgency. And the reason we say that is the IPSASB, because of the 4 points above, is able to develop sustainability reporting guidance immediately, hit the ground running. And that means it doesn't need to establish a separate board. And while there are some advantages to a separate board, because the IPSASB has prioritized getting guidance to market in a timely manner, setting up a separate board or a separate entity takes time. You need to set up terms of reference and processes and due process. And as a result, the IPSASB can really move with urgency on this. So that takes us to our second preliminary view. And the question really is, does the IPSASB's experience, processes, and relationship enable it to develop global public sector specific sustainability reporting guidance? Do you agree with that statement? So this is one of the key views that the IPSASB is putting forward in its consultation paper, and responses to this will really drive the IPSASB's principal decision on whether it should lead a sustainability reporting initiative going forward. So again, I'm happy to see that everyone agrees. This is helpful for the IPSASB. As I mentioned, this decision will be made in December of 2022. In addition to constituent support, the IPSASB will also need to reach out and make sure it has the appropriate financial support and resources to take this forward, because the IPSASB is committed to its financial reporting work program and doesn't want to compromise that. Moving into the next section, what the IPSASB has proposed is that it will, if it moves forward with sustainability reporting, the first two topics it will take on are climate-related disclosures and general disclosure requirements. And there's a couple of reasons for this. From a climate-related disclosure perspective, this seems to be where there's the greatest demand right now. The individuals around the world have kind of identified climate as a significant issue, and more disclosure is required to help those entities be held accountable. And if it's not disclosed, it's not managed, and that's kind of the view here. Also, this is where the IPSASB is starting as well, and the IPSASB has reviewed the exposure draft guidance that's been proposed and believes that's a good starting point for the public sector. So as a result, this will be one of the first areas that the IPSASB leans into. The second area, as I talked to, relates to the general disclosure requirements. And again, this is an area where the IPSASB is beginning, but the IPSASB also believes this is a good area to establish early, because it sets the general principles for all sustainability disclosure. So while you'll set up your general disclosures that represent kind of the sandbox that the IPSASB can play in later, as it sets up individual sets of guidance for each type of sustainability. So you'd have your general disclosure requirements that would flow into your climate disclosures. And the IPSASB feels it's important that those general disclosures set up so that you can move into each topic below, and you've got your general principles that hold it all together. The focus of this slide is, after the IPSASB develops those two sets of guidance, what should it do next? And the reason why the IPSASB is looking for guidance now is the IPSASB really does believe that it needs to move with haste on this. And if the IPSASB moves ahead with this in December, it expects in 12 to 18 months, it will have final standards available to be applied on the general disclosure requirements and climate. So as a result, it needs to look at what it will start next. And even while those documents are out for consultation, there's an opportunity to start moving forward with more sustainability guidance. The IPSASB's identified 5 areas it thought about and heard from constituents in developing its consultation paper, but we'll be interested if there's other areas. The first is sustainability development goals, the SDGs that were identified by the UN. These range obviously from climate to education, equality, life on land, life below water, and really range from a gamut of different sustainability goals. These individual goals could be areas that the IPSASB could focus on for future topics when it moves away from, or as it finishes, the general disclosure requirements and climate. The second is, and I touched on this on a previous slide, is the Natural Resources Project. I said natural resources right now really focuses on recognition and measurement and has scoped out any sustainability disclosure requirements, but this could be a link that could be more firmly established, and the IPSASB could step back in and again add more disclosure requirements related to the sustainability decisions related to natural resources. The next 2 items, complete sector versus entity and materiality, both relate to a point that I talked about earlier on about one of the reasons the public sector needs unique guidance that's different from that of the private sector. And the complete sector versus entity bullet point relates to, in the private sector, a lot of the guidance likely is going to be developed focusing on the entity. So as I said, that entity making a decision to purchase green energy has a cost to the entity and a carbon impact on the entity. Versus in the public sector, those same decisions can be made, but they might have a societal impact as well. So there's going to need to be a different lens for the public sector guidance if there's going to be a broader focus on the societal impacts. The materiality impact, the 4th bullet, is similar. Right now, we have an established materiality concept for financial reporting. And again, that relates to the entity. But in the public sector, especially, some decisions may be material to the entity, not material to broader society, or the reverse may be true. The decisions might not be material to the entity, but maybe material to society. So there's a concept that's been raised by some entities in the previous years talking about double materiality. And that's a concept that the IPSASB can explore as well as it relates to sustainability reporting. And then the final point relates to the IPSASB's established objective of aligning with statistical reporting in the financial reporting space where it's appropriate. And this can be somewhere that the IPSASB looks to in sustainability reporting as well, to make alignments with the statistical community where appropriate. So I'll be interested to hear from you if the IPSASB were to develop sustainability reporting guidance, where should it focus? And we've got the 5 points that I talked through on the polling question right in front of you. But at the very bottom, we also have an other. And if you answer other, I would encourage you to use the chat function and just write down what the other area of focus should be, because that's something we'll take away. And like I said, include in the analysis that we take to the IPSASB in Q4 of this year. So the other point I'd make on when analysis will begin is comments are due, and I hope everyone is interested in some respects to providing the IPSASB with a written response. But the comment period closes on September 9th. And the first chance that the IPSASB has to really review these comments is at its forum in Cascais in Portugal, where it hosts a number of standard setters from all over the world where we discuss these types of issues. And this will be the first chance for the IPSASB to go through its initial review of responses. So when I look at the polling response here, I see mostly support for sustainability development goals. And then I see I see some support for natural resources. It's interesting to see sustainability development goals. I guess that's not overly surprising because there's 17 development goals in there. And as a result, it gives the IPSASB lots of topics and lots of areas to focus on. So I'll change the focus a little of the presentation because the consultation paper moves in a different direction. And what we've focused on for the first half of the consultation is why the IPSASB should get into it, into sustainability reporting. And what the next 2 slides focus on is, if the IPSASB were to go forward, how would the IPSASB develop this guidance and what would this guidance look like? This slide really illustrates the challenge that the IPSASB will have in developing guidance for each topic that it undertakes. So the example that we talk about is climate, because that's what the IPSASB believes one of the first topics it should focus on. And what you'll see here is the IPSASB is really prioritized getting guidance to market, and then also making sure that it addresses public sector issues. And if you start on the far left-hand side of this slide, or the left-hand side of this arrow, you can see that if IPSASB prioritizes absolutely getting guidance to market as soon as possible, so that there's guidance out there for the public sector to use, it could look to guidance in the private sector and just port that over exactly to the public sector. And that would mean that the IPSASB could develop guidance very quickly, but it wouldn't necessarily address a number of public sector issues. On the other side of this arrow, on the right-hand side, the IPSASB could focus purely on public sector issues and ignore anything in the private sector. The challenge here is that means the IPSASB will rethink a number of principles and concepts that have already been considered and decided in the private sector that are likely applicable in the public sector, and means that the time to market will be extended greatly because it's treating every project as a greenfield project. So where the IPSASB proposes and sees itself going is kind of a middle ground. And this evaluation would have to be done on a topic by topic basis. So it would have to be done for the general disclosure requirements, the climate related disclosures, and then any future project that the IPSASB decides to take on. And what this means is the IPSASB would look to the private sector it would first evaluate if there is guidance, and if there is guidance, is it applicable to the public sector? If it is, the IPSASB would dedicate its resources to amending that guidance so that it applies to the public sector. And I kind of touched on this. One of the big benefits to this is the IPSASB isn't rethinking or reconcluding in the same way on decisions that have already been made by the private sector, and allows, like I said, the IPSASB to really focus on those public sector specific issues to ensure that it applies appropriately to the public sector. For those of you that are familiar with the IPSASB's processes, this might look familiar to you in that the IPSASB has a similar process established for its financial reporting work program, where when it's developing IPSAS, it does look to IFRSs to see whether they are applicable in the public sector. And if yes, that's a good starting point for the IPSASB in developing financial reporting guidance. The same concept is being suggested for sustainability reporting. This slide really focuses on what type of guidance or what the framework would look like when the IPSASB hopefully establishes it, and then what type of reporting would be available should entities apply that framework. So the left-hand side focuses on the framework that the IPSASB proposes to develop, and then the right-hand side focuses on what could be or what would be reported by entities if they applied that framework. So I'll start on the right-hand side, and I won't spend a lot of time on the right-hand side, but if the IPSASB's framework was applied, so an entity took on a sustainability initiative, that reporting entity would be able to disclose the governance, strategy, risk management, and then the targets and outcomes related to that sustainability initiative. And as a result, that would help users to understand not only the sustainability initiative, but how that entity is tracking against its goals and whether it's actually achieving its sustainability initiatives. Like I said, I won't spend a lot more time on the right-hand side, and that's because this aligns with the proposals of the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Disclosures, and the proposals they put out. So there's alignment there, and like I said, I won't spend more time than that on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side of this slide, so the big dark blue box, this is the framework that the IPSASB expects it would develop in developing a sustainability reporting framework. And starting at the top white box, the general sustainability disclosure guidance, this white box would really be one of the first projects that the IPSASB would undertake. And this is the general disclosure requirements. And these really are established as the general principles that would be applied relating to all sustainability reporting. And then you'd have topics that sit underneath them. So climate, for example, and then other future topics would lean on these general disclosure requirements as a framework to establish the individual topic requirements. The light blue box, the financial sustainability related guidance, this is the type of guidance or the topics that relate to disclosures that impact the entity specifically. So I gave a few examples earlier, but this is the example of where an entity makes a decision to acquire energy in a cleaner way, or energy that's produced in a cleaner way, and the costs and the carbon impacts, for example, on that decision to the entity. In this case, it's likely that there'll be more private sector guidance that the IPSASB can lean on in developing this guidance. The green box on the other side, this focuses more on the impact of the entity's sustainability initiative decision on the broader environment or on society. So again, taking the example of acquiring energy from a greener perspective, not only would that have an impact on the entity, but it will have an impact on society as well. And that green box would cover that societal impact. The green box is expected to have, or there'll be more greenfield projects. The IPSASB expects that there'll be fewer private sector standards that it can rely on or lean on as it moves into this space. And then the final box at the bottom, the functional specific metrics. This is where the IPSASB will have to help establish targets or just ways to evaluate the sustainability initiatives that public sector entities undertake, so that those users of the disclosed information can evaluate whether the entity is developing appropriate sustainability initiatives and whether it's actually achieving those initiatives. So moving out of this slide, I've got two questions for participants. The first is, if the IPSASB were to develop sustainability reporting guidance, it would apply the framework from the previous slide. The IPSASB would work in collaboration with other international bodies through the application of its current processes. Do you agree with this? And like I said on the previous slides, what I'm really trying to get at here is where it's appropriate, is it right to start with a private sector standard and develop that and make it appropriate for the public sector? And that's really what the question is getting at. Is that framework appropriate? So I'll leave it with you to answer that question, and then I'm happy to talk about the polling results. So again, and this is encouraging, there's 100% support for moving ahead with that proposal. And I think that's the best way to get the guidance to market as quickly as possible while still addressing the public sector specific issues. And like I said, the IPSASB applies that process in developing its financial reporting framework. And as a result, it won't be foreign to the IPSASB in any way should it move ahead with this. The next question relates to if the IPSASB were to develop sustainability reporting guidance, it proposes to address the general requirements and the climate-related disclosures first. Do you agree? And again, this goes back to the reasons I provided a couple slides ago, in that this is where there seems to be the greatest demand from constituents right now. Climate seems to be a high priority globally. And then there's also guidance that's currently under development in the private sector. And as a result, the IPSASB sees this as a good place to start. So I'm just waiting for the last few votes to come in, and I see there's strong support here as well. So for those that answered no, though, I'd actually be very interested if where the other places you think the IPSASB should start are, because that can be brought back to the IPSASB and we consider that as part of our analysis as Q4. So as I move to the last few slides here, the last chapter, or I guess the second to last chapter in the consultation paper, focuses on we call them key enablers, but you can also think of them as challenges the IPSASB will have to move through in developing sustainability reporting guidance. The first is appropriate resourcing in order to develop sustainability reporting guidance in a framework. And what's meant by this is the board needs to have the appropriate resources, it needs to have the appropriate staff. And as I touched on a few times, the IPSASB will need to ensure that it has appropriate funding to move this forward while still being 100% committed to its financial reporting program. The second point is, in order to support the IPSASB has a strong expertise right now in financial reporting, and some knowledge, or some of the board members are experts in sustainability, but not to the same extent as financial reporting. So as a result, what the IPSASB plans to do is develop a sustainability reference group to advise the IPSASB as it moves through sustainability reporting, at least early on or for the first few years of developing sustainability reporting guidance. And this sustainability reporting group will be made up of a group of experts that really understand sustainability, again, to help the IPSASB through any troubled areas that it may not have the expertise, at least to begin with, as it moves through this process. The third point is related to the member time of the IPSASB. And the reason we bring this up is, while the IPSASB is very eager to enter into the sustainability reporting space and has been for, I guess, like I said, for about 18 months now, the challenge is that all of the board members are volunteers, and as a result, they have day jobs and limited time, or they've got a specific time they can allocate to IPSASB, their IPSASB role. And as a result, the IPSASB staff and the general process needs to be set up in a way that allows IPSASB members to continue their work on the financial reporting program and also take on sustainability reporting. The other, I guess, 2 points that are really important are the IPSASB's coordination outside of the board itself. And the first one is coordination with other standard setters. And the two that come to mind are the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, and then the GRI as well. And while there are several others that the IPSASB will need to keep close tabs on and ensure that it strengthens its relationships, this is really a key to the IPSASB establishing and developing guidance in a very rapid way by making sure that we have strong connections and lots of conversations with these other standard setters. We can understand where they're going and make sure the IPSASB is aligned or departs as appropriate. And then finally, again, reaching outside the IPSASB's core network, this is dialogue with national standard setters and its constituents. And the reason why this is important is these individuals and standard setters can identify issues and challenges, and then also solutions at a national level that can be elevated to a global level if they are seen to be global challenges. And while they may start as global challenges, if an individual jurisdiction has addressed them and found a solution and a way forward, the IPSASB can act as a conduit to help solve these issues from a global basis. So from that, I'll move into our 5th preliminary view. And based on those key enablers, the preliminary view was the key enablers are needed for the IPSASB to take forward the development of sustainability reporting guidance. And the question to you, the participants today, is, do you agree with this? Is there anything else that you think the IPSASB is missing? If you answer no, like I said, feel free to use the chat function to let us know what we're missing, and I'll take that back to the IPSASB. So again, strong support for those key enablers. And again, these are just areas that the IPSASB will have to consider as it moves through developing a sustainability reporting and make sure that it's getting this guidance to market in a timely manner. The last question that I have, and this isn't a polling question, but I'd appreciate if you have views to put them in the chat box. This is really asking for you, the participants, where there's areas that you can support the IPSASB. And what I'm really looking for here is, I talked about this a little, but anywhere that you can point to the IPSASB is the IPSASB should look here. Here's something that's being worked on in our jurisdiction, something for the IPSASB to consider. This is all really useful information for the IPSASB in moving this project forward. So if you're aware of any initiatives that are going on in your local jurisdictions, please think of the IPSASB when you're working through those and let us know, because we really like to know about them. And we'd like to make sure that we're considering those where appropriate in developing global guidance. So again, if there's anything that comes to mind now, please use the chat. If there's anything that comes to mind as we move forward or in future months, don't hesitate to reach out to the IPSASB to make sure that we're considering that. So I'll move into our few wrap-up slides, and I've kind of touched on this already, but on May 9th, the IPSASB released 3 linked publications, and I've talked to each of them at least a little bit in this presentation. On the far left, we have Advancing Public Sector Sustainability Reporting Consultation Paper. That's what I spoke about for about 40 minutes now, so I won't go into that anymore, except to say that the consultation period closes for that on September 9th. So if you want to submit a response, please do so by September 9th. I talked about the feedback statement on the mid-period work program consultation. This is last year where the IPSASB consulted on what should be added to its work program. Results came back last December, and on May 9th with the consultation paper for sustainability reporting, the results were published there as well. And then the third link publication relates to natural resources. Again, what the IPSASB has identified is natural resources seem to be one way forward as it relates to sustainability initiatives and ways to address those sustainability initiatives. So those were all published together on May 9th so that constituents could read them together and consider them. Depending on the guidance, they have different exposure dates or different dates where the exposure period closes. Like I said, the consultation paper on sustainability closes on September 9th. Natural resources closes mid-October, and then there is no date for the mid-period work program consultation. That was consulted on last year, and that was just a feedback statement. Finally, as I move into our final slide, just the next steps and where the IPSASB stands. Firstly, I mentioned that the consultation period closes on September 9th. This will have been a 4-month consultation period. This is consistent with the normal consultation period, but what the IPSASB considered having an extended consultation period, but it really goes back to the IPSASB's one of their principal recommendations that this is a timely pursuit and it needs to be pursued with haste. So as a result, it stuck with its 4-month consultation period. Once we get past September 9th, responses will be analyzed immediately. We'll take the first set of responses to the IPSASB standard setters form, which happens about a week later. And then for the remainder of the quarter, the IPSASB will analyze those responses and make its decision in December on whether to go ahead with this. And like I said, this is really going to depend on stakeholder support, but also whether the IPSASB can identify resources to support moving forward sustainability reporting beyond its financial reporting work program. And then the final 3 bullets, these all relate to what the IPSASB will do should it take on sustainability reporting. And you'll see that I don't have a date beside them, just TBD, to be determined. And while the IPSASB expects to move with haste, again, it all depends on the December 2022 decision. So the first bullet focuses on the IPSASB developing exposure drafts for the climate initiative and the general disclosure requirements. And then that really moves through to the final bullet, where hopefully in 12 to 18 months after beginning, the IPSASB will move through and publish 2 final standards. And that really takes us to the end of this webinar. And I guess the point that I really want to close with is, and I guess I've said it a couple times now, is the exposure period for the sustainability reporting consultation paper closes on September 9th. I really encourage anyone who's got views on that to submit a written response. In addition to the feedback that I'll take to the board from this webinar today, those written responses are considered in the IPSASB's analysis on whether to move forward or not. And even though the consultation paper asks all the same questions that we went through today, if you do have views, and whether it's on all the preliminary views and specific matters for comment or just specific ones, I still encourage you to submit a written response, as that is helpful, and you're often able to communicate things that you're not able to communicate just through polling. So with that, I will close the webinar for today and just thank everyone very much for their time. And I hope that it helped you understand where the IPSASB is going, what's in the consultation paper, some of the ideas behind the consultation paper. And again, thank you for your time and wish you well in the rest of your days. Thank you very much.